Nature's Best Hope, a New York Times bestseller, was released in February 2020, and his latest book, The Nature of Oaks, was released by Timber Press in March 2021. Also in 2021, he co-founded Homegrown National Park with Michelle Alfandari. His awards include recognition from the Garden Writers Association, Audubon, the National Wildlife Federation, the Garden Club of America, and the American Horticultural Association. It is my honor and pleasure to present Doug Tallamy.
Well,
Doug?
thank you very much, Donna. You know, when I got on the Zoom today, Donna says, "When's your next book coming out?" But as soon as I finish my email, so whenever that is. All right, we're going to talk about Homegrown National Park today, or my idea of what that should be. But before we do that, I want to introduce you to my friend here. This is a spider that's sitting on top of a leaf. It kind of looks like a fecal sac that a bird has dropped after it takes the feces out from a nest. They just fly out and drop it. And that's what it wants you to think it is, because then you won't eat it. But if you look up close, it is a spider. There's the head there and the legs. It's called a Bolus spider. It's a very special group of spiders because they don't hunt with a web. They simply drop a single strand of silk and put a sticky glob of glue on the end there. It's called a bolus. Reminds you of the weapon that the knights used to use in the Middle Ages. And it sits there waiting for a moth to fly into this target. And you would think that would never happen, but it does happen. Moths fly in, they get stuck on the sticky glob of glue, and the spider right away wraps the moth up in silk. Around and around she goes, and then she feeds on this moth that's wrapped up there, and then she finally cuts it loose. And if she does this enough times with enough moths, she has the energy to make an egg mass. Here she is making a very fancy egg mass. All the eggs are in there. Well, I was curious. This is a very interesting behavior because it's, you know, a moth flying into this by accident, it's just not going to happen. But it's not by accident. She's actually releasing the sex pheromone of a particular species of moth. And I wanted to know what the sex pheromone is. So she's calling in moths, but it's always a male and it's always one species to match the sex pheromone that she's releasing. So I unwrapped the bodies that she was cutting loose, and it turns out it's the bronze cutworm, at least at my house. And I've got bronze cutworms at my house, enough of them that she could make 3 egg masses this fall. By the way, she's hanging from a white oak tree in my yard. Those egg masses are still there. They were overwintering and they will hatch fairly soon. That's what a bronze cutworm larva looks like, a caterpillar. And again, we have that because we've got goldenrod. That's its main host. And there's the white oak that supported my Bolus spider. And because I've got this white oak, I also have the dot line white. It's a beautiful white moth that eats oak as a caterpillar. And after it finishes eating oaks, it spins a cocoon and attaches it to one of the oak leaves. And then the oak leaves, of course, fall to the ground. There's a cocoon in there. Can you see it? It's right there. There it is up close. But of course, you're not going to see that when you're walking by. But this is something that's lost when we rake up the leaves from our yard and throw it out. We throw out all the cocoons that are in those leaves as well. But I kept the leaves, so I got the dot line white. I've got the Megarrhiza atrata, which is the largest ichneumoniid wasp in the country. The ovipositor alone is about 5 inches long. And we have this wonderful beast in our yard because we've got sericid horntails, which are in our white pine trees. That's the host. Those wasps drill down through the pine bark and parasitize the horntails. We've got buckeyes because, and that's what the larva is, not too special, but we've got plantain, and people say, oh, plantain is not a native plant. There are actually about 30 species of native plantains. So there are lots of native plantains around. So I could go on talking about all the things that occur at our house. I wouldn't be able to do that if I lived here. It wouldn't take me long to describe the species in a landscape like this because there are very few. Because they don't have the goldenrod, which means they don't have the bronze cutworm, which means they don't have the Bolus spider. They don't have plantain, so they don't have the buckeye. They don't have white pine, so they don't have Megarrhiza. A lot of things they don't have. There's very little that can live in a typical landscape like this. And this is, of course, the dominant landscape across the entire country. And it's one of the reasons that we're seeing pretty scary headlines. The insect apocalypse is here, talking about global insect decline. North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. That's a third of our North American bird population already gone. 2/3 of the Earth's wildlife is already gone. The UN says we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years, which is not an option, by the way. So the news that we're reading is not good. And that's why Elizabeth Colbert gets to write the 6th Great Extinction. This is a book about the 6th Great Extinction event that is occurring right now on planet Earth. There have been 5 other ones, but this is the first one to be caused by one of the species on the planet, and that, of course, is us. Why is all this happening? It's really one, you can boil down to one very simple reason. We have not shared the planet with the natural world. We've taken what we need for ourselves. We keep growing our populations, and we're not leaving very much left for the natural world. And the problem with that is we need the natural world. We can't live without it. Jason Hickel says biodiversity loss is such a strange euphemism for the mass destruction of non-human beings. That's what we've been about for a long time. This came out in New York Times just the other day. It's the areas with the greatest number of threatened species. So I don't know where you people live, all over the place, but California not doing so well, Florida not doing so well. Even look at the Smoky Mountains not doing so well because there's so many species that are threatened because of human activity. So if you're wondering whether you live in an area that is in trouble, check out this map. What's our reaction to these sobering statistics? Well, it varies, and there are actually people studying it. Richard Hobbs says that our reaction to the loss of nature is very similar to the 5 stages of grief that we go through if we find out that we have a terminal disease. First, there's denial, and there's a lot of people still denying that we have a problem at all. Then there's anger. I get stuck in that one quite a bit. Bargaining, well, maybe it's not so bad. I don't know what bargaining means. Depression, there's an awful lot of people depressed about the loss of nature. But then the 5th stage is acceptance. And this is where I take issue with Richard Hobbs, because acceptance to me is too easily equated with giving up. We cannot accept the state of affairs right now because giving up is not an option, because living with nature is not an option. Nature is essential. It's not optional. So I'm going to propose a 6th stage, and that is action, where we're actually going to do something about it that will reverse things. Now, we do have parks and we have preserved, but particularly our national parks were established because they were pretty places. They were established to preserve exquisite scenery. Teddy Roosevelt said it very well. He said, this is good administration to save these places. They provide effective outdoor living, recreation, and then they produce good citizens. What he really was saying is that our parks were created because they're pretty places for us to play. And that's a fine reason, and I'm not faulting Teddy because he wasn't looking at the ecological value of these places. The word ecology hadn't even been invented yet. Nobody knew about ecology back then. Well, John Muir had some ideas about it, but because we only saved the areas that are exquisitely beautiful, there's just not that many of them. We've only preserved, permanently protected 12% of the US, and that includes huge areas in Alaska. And these are those areas, which means 88% of the US is not protected. And what's been happening outside those protected areas really is appalling. Every 30 seconds, a football field worth of America's natural areas disappears to development. And I think that word development is one of the most oxymoronic words in the English language. There are at least 40 million acres of lawn today. That's a 2005 statistic. And that's an area the size of New England dedicated to an ecological deadscape. We've paved over an area larger than Ohio. We've got 2 million acres of golf courses, which is an area larger than Rhode Island and Delaware combined. 484 million acres of residential property, and that does not include urban centers, which is 220 times larger than Yellowstone National Park. So that's what's happening outside of our parks. And because it happens piecemeal, a little bit here, a little bit there, I think Matt Lee Hashley sums it up really well. Evaluating the condition of nature is a bit like watching a leaking pipe. If a person focuses on each drop as it falls to the floor, the leak hardly seems very damaging. But if they leave for the day, You come back, the room is full of water. And that's kind of what we've done. We've left for the day and we come back and now we realize, geez, we have destroyed an awful lot of places. So we're going to talk about restoring those places. I'm going to provide a little brief ecology primer here just to make sure that everybody is on the same page with terms that I throw around all the time. And biodiversity is one of them. A lot of people say, well, what the heck is biodiversity? It's simply all the forms of life on Earth. We typically count the number of species. So if you have a lot of species, you got a lot of biodiversity, but it could be genetic diversity. It could be ecosystem diversity. It's whatever however you define it, but it is life forms on planet Earth. Habitat. Now, most people think a habitat is a place to live, and they'll look at an area that's invaded with non-native plants. They say, damn, that's good habitat. Habitat is a place to live, but it's also the food and water that is required by an organism. So an area that's invaded by non-native plants, it does provide shelter, no doubt about it, but it doesn't provide the food that you need. So it's not good habitat. An ecosystem is a community of interacting organisms, how they interact with each other and how they interact with the physical environment. And ecosystem services, that's the life support that is provided by functioning ecosystems. Provided, we always say it's provided for us. Yes, but it's provided for everything that is out there. Okay, we do have parks, we have preserves. It's not just our national parks. We've got other areas that have some level of protection. Why isn't that enough to sustain the nature that we need to run the ecosystems that we all depend on? And the answer is that those protected areas, or the areas that are not yet destroyed, are too few and too small. When you take a large area like this and you shrink it down to a little habitat patch, and that's an exaggeration in a lot of places, but not too much of an exaggeration. The average woodlot size in the state of Delaware is 10 acres. So it's not very big. So when you shrink an area down to like a space like that, you're taking a large population of whatever's living there and shrinking it down to small populations. And that is the problem with little habitat patches. Small populations are highly vulnerable to local extinction. Why? Because all populations fluctuate. In good times, they go up, and bad times, they go down. If you are a large population, as this top line is here, even in your down cycle, there's enough individuals so you can increase quickly when times get better. But if you're a tiny population, often in your normal fluctuations, you hit zero and you blink out of your little habitat patch, and then you're gone. And unless you can recolonize it, and so many things can't because they simply can't move around our human-dominated spaces. Picture a box turtle crawling across Route 95. It's not going to happen. Then you're permanently gone. That's called local extinction. And there's studies all over the world that are telling us very clearly the natural areas that we have left out there are not large enough to sustain the amount of nature that we humans depend on. Now we talk about extinction as if that's the only metric. Now there certainly are things, there's our friend the dodo, that are permanently gone. But I'm going to argue that that's not a good metric at this point. We do have an extinction crisis, but we have to beware of the loss of common species, even if they're not extinct yet. This is the American chestnut. It's not extinct, but it was a tree that dominated ecosystems along the Appalachian crest from Maine all the way down to Georgia, and determined just about everything that was happening in those forests. So functionally, it's extinct. There's only a few whips here and there coming up from rootstocks. And it was a terrible blow to those ecosystems. This is the rusty patch bumblebee. You've heard about the rusty patch bumblebee. It used to be one of the most common bumblebees in North America. It's not extinct yet, but try to find it. So functionally, it's extinct. It's not performing its role in the ecosystem anymore. Beavers. Now, beavers aren't extinct either, and they are actually making a comeback, but we decimated their population so much that it changed the entire hydrology of continental US, believe it or not. Beavers were controlling the hydrology. It is now totally different because we got rid of beavers. So the loss of common species can have huge impacts. And that's called defaunation. It's not extinction or local extinction. You're taking away the numbers of animals that are typically in an ecosystem. There's a few left, but the numbers are down. If you think about the numbers of individuals that live in your yard right now, and compared to the numbers that used to live there before it was your yard, it's going to be just a fraction of what used to be there in most cases. So that's called defaunation. And the problem is we don't notice defaunation because of something called shifting baseline. we tend to think that the way things were when we were kids is the ways they have always been, because that's all we've ever known. And that means none of us missed the passenger pigeon. It was the most common bird on the entire planet, but we hunted it to extinction. And it was gone before any of us were born, so we don't miss it. But the impact on our ecosystems was large. And this is happening repeatedly. The kids that are born today, they go outside and they don't hear any birds, or they don't see anything running around their yard, and they think that's normal, which means they're not concerned about the loss of nature. Shifting baseline means that we are losing biodiversity, the biodiversity that we absolutely need, and we're not even noticing it. Okay, E.O. Wilson. We can, there's all kinds of descriptives we can apply to this great man. He died the day after Christmas, so it was a terrible loss to the world of conservation. One of the themes through his very long career was trying to save life on Earth. He loved biodiversity. He knew that we needed it. He wrote repeatedly about how important it was. And in 2016, he put all that together in a book he called Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life. And in this book, he said that we need to save functioning ecosystems. We need to save nature on half of planet Earth if we're going to save life on any of planet Earth. That was the message of the book. He spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that statement, and then he ended the book. He didn't tell us a whole lot about how we were going to do that. Well, believe it or not, governments are starting to listen. The UN is starting to listen. You've heard of the 30-30 global initiative. People talk about it, Biden's initiative. It's not Biden's initiative, it's the UN's initiative. And it's step one towards preserving 50% of the Earth by 2050. So, yes, we're going to put half the Earth aside for nature by 2050, starting with 30% by 2030. That's great. But you know what everybody's thinking? They're thinking we're going to protect pristine habitat on 50% of the Earth. It doesn't exist on 50% of the Earth. Half of planet Earth right now is in some form of agriculture, of terrestrial Earth. So, if we can't, we're not going to get rid of agriculture. So if we can't use that half, how can we possibly do this? Conservation biologists are excited. Well, this would be great if we save half the planet Earth, but we are wondering how we're going to do that. With half of the Earth in some form of agriculture and 7.9, soon to be 8 billion people on the other half, plus all of our infrastructure, all of our detritus in that other half. And we don't have a third half aside to put aside or a third half of the Earth to put aside for nature. So how can this be possible? How can we realize EO's goal? Well, I actually think we can. I think the answer is obvious, believe it or not. But we're going to have to give up the idea that humans and nature cannot coexist. So the answer is we're going to coexist. We have to live together unless we humans just all go to Mars, and that's not going to happen. So the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist has been around pretty much forever. We've segregated nature to the far corners of the Earth because we thought we couldn't live together. So what I want to argue is that not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that is left to us. In the past, of course, conservationists worked exclusively where there weren't a lot of people in those parks and preserves. We now need to turn this on its head, and we need to save nature, actually reconstruct it where there are a lot of people. In other words, we have to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes, not hang on by a thread, but thrive. So where are we going to do this? If protected areas are not large enough to preserve the amount of nature that we need, we're going to have to practice conservation outside of preserved areas. Where we live, where we work, where we farm, where we play, where we shop, all of those places now have to become functioning ecosystems. So we're not just going to do conservation here, we're going to do it here as well. So that's how we're going to meet EO's 30-30 and 50-50 goals. And believe it or not, it's not going to be that hard. This is totally doable. 78% of the US is privately owned. So we're going to start practicing conservation on private property. 85.6% of the US east of the Mississippi is privately owned. If we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail, and we can't afford to fail. Okay. This is a reenactment of an idea I had in 2008. Of course, I haven't changed a bit, but I was sitting in this very chair staring out the window early one Sunday morning. And this is when I first ran across the study that measured the amount of lawn that we have in the US. And it was 40 million acres in 2005. I said, well, gee, 40 million acres, that's a lot. What if we cut that area in half? What if we reduce the area of lawn by half and turned it into functioning ecosystems again? How much area would that be? Well, it'd be 20 million acres. How big is 20 million acres? In other words, what if we cut this all the area we have dedicated to an ecological deadscape in half? And by the way, I realized that we need lawn in order to advertise our high status. It's what it is. It's a status symbol, and I get it. We're not going to give up status symbols. And we also need lawn, by the way, to display our Halloween decorations. But if we cut the area of lawn in half, it will give us 20 million acres, which is enough to create a new national park. And if we do this at home, we can call it Homegrown National Park, the title of this talk. And I'm sure you've seen this before, but it's a big area. It's the size of the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badland National Park, Olympic National Park, plus Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. You add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park would be the biggest park in the country. Well, I had that idea in 2008. I started to put it in my talks and mention it. But I didn't actually write about it until I wrote Nature's Best Hope, which came out in 2020. And I included a chapter called Homegrown National Park. So again, more words, a lot of talk, not much action though. Well, shortly before the pandemic, I was giving a talk in in Connecticut. And this is Michelle Alfanderi. She had she was closed down a business she had going in Manhattan, had run for 40 years and had moved up to Connecticut. Her neighbor, for reasons unknown, dragged her to the talk I was giving. So Michelle lived in Manhattan. She was not a nature girl, and really she's a perfect example of what we call the non-choir. People who just don't recognize that we have an issue and there's something, a role that everybody has to play. So she came to my talk, and afterwards she came up to me and she said, you're only talking to the choir. And I said, yeah, it's only the choir who invites me. She said, well, you're not going to succeed unless you reach the non-choir, people like me. And I said, yes. And I know where she was going. She said, but this is what I do. We have to use social media. We've got to create a website. You've got to reach all these people that don't know anything about this. And I said, yeah, but that's not what I do. I do the science behind it. And she said, I will do this for you. Now, she's not the first person to offer to do this, but I got worn down. I finally said, okay, we have to get serious about it. I'm not getting any younger here. So Michelle created what we're calling the official Homegrown National Park website, homegrownnationalpark.org, and has the idea that everybody who is involved in some form of conservation on the property that they own can get themselves on the map. It means they're going to record the area where they live and the amount of area that they are conserving, preserving, restoring, pledging to restore. So if you cut the area of lawn you have in half, you put that area on there. If they've got a woodlot in the back that you're protecting, that goes there. All of that space goes on the map. And then your little area of your county will light up. And the object is to get the entire country to light up, to get this message of the importance of conservation and the important role that everybody plays in conservation, to get that message to go viral. So this has been launched for a little bit more than a year now. We have a little bit over 14,000 people who are on the map, and it seems to be working. And by the way, it's free. And people say, are you using our data? I don't even know what that means. So no, we're not using your data. But what is the product of Homegrown National Park? Well, national awareness is one. It's one of the most important products. Yes, we're going to convert lawn into beautiful areas like this, or functional areas like this, and that's really important. But changing our culture, establishing the recognition that nature is not optional and that it's everybody's responsibility to help sustain it. That's the cultural change that we hope Homegrown National Park will achieve. And we're not just talking about what the problems are. We hear enough about that. We're talking about the solutions, the solution that everybody can be engaged in. It's also the lighting up the map actually does create a measurable it's conservation that can be measured. We can watch the country light up. We can see where there are gaps in the map and where we can focus on new conservation efforts. So in essentially it converts hope to action. And that's what we need now. We need that 6-step action. It's also aspirational. This is going to be a real cultural change, and everybody needs to be involved. You can aspire to make a difference, and it doesn't rely on governmental support. Certainly wouldn't turn down any governmental support, but it's great. Keep politics out of it. It also merges a number of national conservation efforts that already exist. There are certified habitats from Audubon. National Wildlife Federation started the idea more than 40 years ago. Wild Ones has been convincing people to work on their yards for a number of years. And there are a number of groups like this. But we're all going to get together, not compete with each other, and record these areas on the map and see what the real national conservation movement is all about. And it's going to reveal those holes in biological corridors that we can then address. So the object is to create a map that's going to be very similar to the COVID maps that you see on the New York Times, where every county is going to have a color based on the amount of participation in that county. So we've hired an agency to actually create maps like this. It's expensive. I don't know how the New York Times does it, but they do it every single day with COVID. So they're still working on our data, and we'll get it up soon to see, we can actually see where we're actually making progress. So this is a science-based, it's a grassroots call to action that can address the biodiversity crisis in 2 major ways. We're going to put more natives in our yard because natives are what's going to drive biodiversity. And we're also going to remove invasive species, the plants that are not contributing to local ecosystem health. And we certainly got a lot of those because in the past, we have thought of plants really pretty much in one way, as if they were decorations. So when we went to the nursery, we bought plants for their beauty. Maybe screens, anchor, focal point, but it really was all about aesthetics with no thought at all to the ecological roles those plants needed to be playing. And this was okay, remember, because nature was someplace else. We segregated it. We weren't having to share our spaces with it. But when we think of plants just as decorations, then landscaping equals ecological destruction. That's a beautiful landscape. It's art in the landscape, but it's not a functioning ecosystem. When you do that to the whole planet goes down the tubes. So what we're going to do, of course, is to be as beautiful as we possibly can, but we're also going to pick plants with function in mind. They're going to support local food webs so that we have the animals to run our ecosystems. We're going to support pollinators. We're going to support natural enemies. We're going to restore soil, store carbon, do all the things that plants need to do in addition to being pretty. In other words, we're going to include function as one of the criteria in our plant choices. And when we do that, landscaping is going to equal ecosystem restoration rather than degradation. So I'm calling this 21st century landscaping. We've done 20th century landscaping and we're in the 6th grade extinction. So that's not working so well. Let's give 21st century landscaping a try. So who's the we here? Who's going to help us make this transition? Well, certainly the choir. The choir loves to go outside and get their hands dirty and help do this. Unfortunately, the choir is pretty small. The fact is, most people don't like to garden, or most people don't have the time to garden. They manage their landscape by hiring somebody. So the real workforce has to be a workforce that doesn't quite exist yet. I'm going to call them ecological landscapers or ecological gardeners, where the average homeowner can call somebody up and say, come do it on my yard, pick the right plants, maintain them, install them, do everything that the mow, blow, and go guys do right now, the lawn care companies. And it can be the same people too. We don't have to fire everybody, just retrain them so that they know how to ecologically landscape. There are a number of groups that are already engaged in this, so we're not starting from scratch. Probably thousands of them out there, thousands of people doing this, but we need millions. What do we have in this country? 320 million people. A lot of people need this service. And there's a lot of things that ecological landscapers are going to know so that the homeowner doesn't have to worry about it. They're going to know, for starters, that every landscape has 4 primary ecological responsibility. Every single landscape has to support a food web. Every single landscape has to sequester carbon, has to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, lock it up in plant tissues, and pump it into the soil. Every landscape has to manage the watershed in which it lies, as opposed to a landscape like this, which is destroying the local watershed. And every landscape has to support pollinators. All these 4 things have to happen everywhere on the planet, including where we live, where we work, all of those places. They're going to know that lawn accomplishes none of those goals. So they're going to know they have to reduce the area of lawn. They're going to know that the plants we put in the area that is now lawn, some of them have to be what I'm calling keystone plants. What's a keystone plant? Remember what a keystone is. That's the Roman arch. The keystone is the stone in the middle of the arch. And if you take that stone out of the arch collapses. Well, keystone plants are the really important native plants that are supporting the food webs the best. It turns out that just 5% of our native plants are supporting food webs better than any other plant by supporting caterpillars more than any other plant. Caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So a landscape without caterpillars is a failed landscape, failed food web. And just 5% of our native plants are supporting 75% of the caterpillar food that drives those food webs. So think of the keystone plants in the ecological house that you're building as the 2x4s that hold that house up. They're essential support. You can't build a house out of wallpaper, and that's what we've been trying to do in the past. You're not through building your house when you have your keystone plants, but they're an essential part of it. Ecological landscapers are going to know all of that. They're also going to know which ornamental plants are highly invasive, like calorie pear, Bradford pear, and they're going to avoid those plants. They're going to know that if you plant them, this is what happens to all the land around you. You know that you can drive from New York City to Richmond, Virginia, and further south now. And in the springtime, when calorie pear is in bloom, it's white the entire way because of this escaped ornamental plant. And that's just one species. We've got 3,300 species of invasive plants on this continent. So ecological landscapers are going to avoid those. They're also going to know what E.O. Wilson said: insects are the little things that run the world. We cannot live without them. And they're going to know that most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. 90% of them can only eat the plants for which they have very specialized adaptations that allow them to get around the plant defenses. Plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they protect themselves with nasty chemicals, but insects can eat those plants, particular plants, when they have the adaptations to get around those particular defenses. Developing those adaptations takes a long time. And once they fall into place, the insect is locked into eating that particular plant. They're going to know all of that. So if you take the milkweed out of your yard and replace it with hostas, the monarch butterfly is going to disappear because the only thing it can eat is milkweed. And that is true for 90% of the insects that are out there. So this is key. This is key, but it's also new. Understanding that landscapes without a lot of caterpillars are failed landscapes. Brand new landscaping goal. They're also going to know about pollinators. They're going to know why we need pollinators, and they're going to know that we need pollinators. We get it. We need pollinators, but a lot of people are confused about why we need pollinators. I hear it all the time. We need pollinators because they pollinate a third of our crops, as if that's the only important thing pollinators do. It's not even accurate. They pollinate about 12% of our crops. And then I hear people say, well, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need to worry about supporting pollinators. That's the danger of thinking only in terms of crop support. It's animals, pollinators, that are pollinating 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. If we lost our pollinators, we'd lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet, and that is not an option, including our crops. So think of all the plants around you. We need pollinators for them, which means, and we need pollinators everywhere. We need plants, which is everywhere, including our yards. Ecological landscapers are going to know what kills insects. They're going to know that when we bring a lot of insects to our yard and then have lights on at night, we kill them, particularly those all-important moths that are making the caterpillars that run our food webs. They're really attracted to nocturnal light. And they're going to know when you hire Mosquito Joe He's not just killing mosquitoes, he's killing all the insects that this fog hits. Even though he says this is a natural product, it is a natural product. It's pyrethroids. It's the same compound that is in chrysanthemums. But cyanide is a natural product too, so that's not a good argument. And he also says it only kills mosquitoes. I wish he was right, but he is not close to right. It kills everything, including those beautiful monarchs that it comes in contact with. And look at it, it comes in contact with everything that's out there. And they're going to know that we can reduce light pollution. It's easy to get rid of Mosquito Joe, just don't hire him. But what do we do about this light pollution? The easy thing to do is to take the white bulbs out of your security lights, that light over your garage or the light over your porch, and put in a yellow bulb. A yellow LED bulb is the best because nocturnal insects are not attracted to yellow wavelengths. You don't have to wait for your ecological landscaper to do this. You can make that change immediately. And if enough people do that, we will save millions of insects every night and millions of dollars too, because LEDs are a lot more energy efficient. Ecological landscapers are going to know that we can do this on small properties, like Pam Carlson's property here in Chicago. It's 1/10 of an acre, 3 times smaller than the average lot size. And it's an island. It's not connected to any natural area, but she's recorded 124 species of birds that use her yard. And it's beautiful. Most of all, ecological landscapers are going to know that conservation works, that all of this cultural change is going to pay off. We talked about the fact that we've lost 3 billion breeding birds in North America in the last 50 years. Well, not waterfowl. Waterfowl have increased 54% in the last 50 years. Why? Because groups like Ducks Unlimited spent time trying to conserve them. They preserved and recreated stopover water habitats for migrating ducks. They provided habitat, in other words. So these are big organized efforts that have brought back many more waterfowl than there were just 50 years ago. The Nachusa grassland in Illinois, 3,800 acres. It's got more than 730 native plant species, 180 species of birds. It used to be a cornfield. So yes, we can put it back. Private citizens can do this too. Those are big efforts. Say, well, what can one person do? Private citizens can make a big difference. And I'm going to use the story of the bluebird as an example. This is a natural snag. There's a bluebird hole right up there and another one down there. This is where bluebirds used to nest. Well, at the turn of the century, we brought in starlings and they proliferated. So the first half of the 1900s, starlings took over all the bluebird holes that were out there. And there weren't that many because we get rid of snags all the time. But bluebirds were in trouble. They were in real trouble. So what did we do? We started putting up bluebird houses. And now, believe it or not, bluebirds are one of the most common birds that we have out there because of these simple conservation efforts that homeowners made. Bluebirds are doing fine. It works. Conservation works. And I've got personal experience with how well it works by seeing what's happened at our house right here in Oxford, Pennsylvania. This is what it looked like when Cindy and I moved in the year 2000. It was part of a farm that had been farmed to death for over 300 years. I'd been mowed for hay before we moved in, and there were very few plants when we did move in. So of course we wanted to restore that biodiversity. And by the way, the plants that were there, this is what our property looked like. It was like Sleeping Beauty's castle. That's honeysuckle, multiflora rose, autumn olive. It was all there. Here's Cindy getting rid of all that stuff. Yes, I helped a little bit, but not that much. So the first thing you say is, this is too much work. We can't do that. Well, little skinny Cindy did it. So you can do it. You just pick at it a little bit every day and then it's gone. And then we put the plants back. And then I started counting the number of moss species that are now making a living at my house and went up to 1,140 species of moss. So far, I got 4 species the other night. The first warm night that we've had. So we're still adding new species. Who knows how many species actually live here? And this is just moths. We haven't started with the butterflies yet. So you put the plants back, then the basis of the food web returns. And you get things like the beautiful chinkapin leaf miner. the skullcap skeletonizer, the neighbor. A lot of them have very cool names like the little devil, the horrid zale, the obtuse yellow, the explicit arches, the grateful midget, the pink shaded fern moth, the scribbler, the lemon plagotes, the showy emerald, the green marvel. Everybody needs a green marvel at their house, or a tufted bird dropping moth. It's essential. Harris's three spot, the bride, the eyed pectes, and all the birds that keep those moth populations in check. People worry if you got all these caterpillars, it's going to be denuded, it'll be terrible. Well, here's the wood thrush. It's come back to our house. They're eating hundreds of caterpillars a day. In fact, we have 60 species of birds that now breed on our property, not fly by, but breed, eating things like the drab prominent. So we don't have any, the big problem now is finding caterpillars because the birds are eating all of them. We've restored the biodiversity by putting the right plants back in our yard. We also have lots of invertebrate predators there. So it's not just caterpillars, it's all the other insects that depend on them, like ambush bugs or assassin bugs or predatory stink bugs, and all of the Hymenoptera parasitoids or predatory wasps that are attacking these caterpillars all the time. This is called the balance of nature. We have balance in our trophic levels. First trophic level is the plants. You put the right plants back. A lot of things come to eat those plants, but then many more things come to eat those plant eaters, and it all stays in balance. And then, of course, we have the even higher trophic levels than that. Skunks, they're primarily insectivores. Possums, raccoons, foxes, they're all insectivores, believe it or not. 25% of a fox's diet is insectivores. This is a mama fox that bred in our front yard last year. It was very entertaining. And the little guys we never see, a number of species of shrews and other rodents that are eating insects as well. And we've got those amphibians, the toads, the forest toad salamander. Oh, come back here. We certainly have, we've got a few reptiles, box turtles. Yes, they're eating some insects. The very lovely ringneck snake, totally harmless. And the cutest little gray tree frogs that you ever would see. They're green when they're little. So all these things and many more things have come back to our yard because we put the plants back. But the things we have to think about, is shrinking the area of lawn going to be enough? This is where lawn is focused in the country. Certainly most of it is in the east. The dark areas is where you have the most lawn. Look at New Jersey, 21% of New Jersey is lawn, and other mid-Atlantic states. But there are big areas in the middle of the country where there's not much lawn. So I did some calculations the other day. We've got 1.9 billion acres in the lower 48 states. Now, less than 12% of it, or 228 million acres, is protected. That leaves 1.6 billion acres unprotected. Now, 78% of the US, or 1.3 billion acres, is privately owned. And if Homegrown National Park restores 20 million acres on private property, that's only 1.5% of what needs to be restored. In other words, our goals are too modest. Shrinking the lawn is not going to be enough. We need to do more than that. Most of our privately owned land is actually in other forms rather than woods, or rather than lawn. There's a lot of it is in small woodlots. A ton of it is in cropland, and even more is in rangeland. So we're going to have to do conservation in those areas as well. We have 406 million acres of woodlots managed by private citizens, not logging companies in the US. And this is one of them right here in Pennsylvania. There are 738,000 private forest landowners in Pennsylvania alone, and they control 11.5 million acres. And how they control them, how they manage those landscapes is going to determine how well biodiversity does. A lot of these are managed for harvesting wood, and you can do that, but you also have to manage the invasive species load in these woodlots, or it's not going to help biodiversity. There are a number of organizations popping up, like the Foundation for Sustainable Forests, which is telling people how you can actually make money off your woodlot without destroying the local ecosystem. There's two ways to harvest your wood. It's called high grade harvesting, where you take the best trees and leave the worst, or worst first forest management, where you take the worst trees and leave the best. High grade harvesting gives you a good harvest once. and then you're done. That woodlot is done for 100 years. Worst first selection with smaller, more frequent harvest leads to higher yields of wood over time, and you can do it indefinitely. So obviously the second choice is the way to go. But you also have to manage the invasive plants that are in our woodlots. A lot of woodlots look like this, where 30% of the plant material are invasive species from Asia. And believe it or not, step one in managing invasive species is to manage deer. A lot of people don't want to hear this, but we have overabundance of deer from coast to coast, and they are the primary driver behind the invasiveness of the escaped plants that we have, because they don't like to eat them either. They love the native plants. They hate the non-native plants, so they won't eat the barberry, they won't eat the burning bush, they won't eat the autumn olive, they don't eat the porcelain berry, but they love oaks and everything else that comes up. So you end up with a forest where the natives, the young recruitment into the forest is gone, and it's either choked with non-natives or it looks like that with no understory at all. This is the deer exposure on this side, and that's what it should look like when the deer are not present. So if we allow deer to remain overabundant in our forests, not only does it encourage invasive plants like stiltgrass, it also encourages Asian jumping worms, believe it or not. This is new data coming out of Cornell that when you have a lot of deer, the Asian jumping worms do really well. Why? Nobody knows, but that's what it's looking like. But if we don't control deer on our woodlots, you have a lot of invasive plants and no recruitment, and not too many years, the big trees will fall down and you won't have a forest at all. So it's essential. What about cropland? A lot of cropland in the US. All that light green is cropland, Canada as well. So it's a huge area of the country that we can't ignore if we're going to do effective conservation. There are 4 ways we can increase biodiversity on farms without impacting yield at all. We have to manage the roadsides. This is a typical roadside in our farms all over the place. We've got to restore hedgerows. We've got to put in prairie strips, and we have to reduce the use of neonicotinoid insecticides. What used to be on the roadsides? Weeds. Those weeds are native plants like asters and milkweed and everything that we don't like we call a weed. But that's what sustained monarch populations. It's what sustains the 4,000 species of native bees in this country. It was all the vegetation that used to be on the side of our roads that is now lawn. So this is the new agricultural ethic, is to get rid of those weeds by spraying it with Roundup and then replacing it with lawn, strictly so that it looks nice. It was a terrible blow to biodiversity, but people are putting it back. There's a roadside in Iowa. They put back over 1,000 miles of prairie on Iowan roadsides, highly productive places that we need to do everywhere. Prairie strips, a lot of new research going into prairie strips. So that's a prairie strip right in the middle of a soybean field. And it's obvious it's going to be really good for pollinators. But it also reduces the loss of topsoil by 95%. They're laid out in areas perpendicular to the flow of water across cropland, so it grabs the topsoil and holds it in place, and it reduces water pollution by also grabbing the nutrients and the pesticides that, as of now, runs off into our rivers and then pollutes our oceans. So you say, well, the farmer is losing arable land. Through cost-sharing programs from the USDA CRP programs, the farmer's not losing any money on this at all and is providing ecosystem services for the entire country. We need to put the hedgerows back, and they need to be hedgerows made of native species. We did a study, done lots of studies, but this one fits right in. We measured caterpillar use in hedgerows that are invaded by non-native plants versus caterpillars in hedgerows not invaded by non-native plants. These are all native hedgerows. Hard to find these guys. But when they're invaded, there's 68% fewer species of caterpillars in the invaded hedgerows. Caterpillar abundance was reduced by 91%, and caterpillar biomass, the amount of energy available for birds, was reduced by 96%. So when we allow these hedgerows to be invaded by non-natives, we lose 96% of the bird food. No wonder our birds are declining. And the final thing that we have to do on cropland is to avoid neonicotinoid seed coatings. It's very hard to buy seeds now that aren't pink or purple covered with neonicotinoids. I'm embarrassed. I'm an entomologist, and I just learned how bad these things really are. They are 7,000 times more toxic to insects and birds than DDT was. They're used preventively. It's prophylactic. They're on there whether or not the crop is attacked by a insect pest or not. Studies have shown that they do not increase yield at all. You can compare crops without neonicotinoids with crops with them, no increase in yield. So why do the farmers do it? Because it's available, the seed companies tell them to do it, and it's cheap. Those aren't good reasons. Only 5% of the neonicotinoid on the seed coating is taken up by the plant. 95% of it washes off into the water table, it's water soluble, or it blows away on dust and is carried to who knows where, killing all our grasshoppers and everything else. So these are already banned in Europe, by the way. Terrible for pollinators for all these reasons. So this is something that needs to be ended as soon as possible. Okay, rangeland. 770 million acres of rangeland in the US, 4.5 times the size of Texas. If it's managed properly, it all should be part of Homegrown National Park. This is an experimental range that Cindy and I went to in Nebraska several years ago. Those are cattle. That's not bison out there. The yellow flowers here, these are all sunflowers. This was a really biodiverse place. All the prairie birds were there. The cattle were happy. It wasn't overgrazed. So you can improve the biodiversity value of rangeland simply by reducing the number of cows on it. That's step one. But step two is to restore the riparian corridors that go through these areas. Almost all rangelands, just about every single one of them, has a stream or a river going through it. And when you allow the cattle to go in there, they eat the cottonwoods and the willows that maintain the stream bank, that maintain the water flow, that control the entire hydrology of the region. So you keep the cows out of the water, you can provide water other ways, and you can restore the vitality of your rangeland quite quickly. All right, there's something common to each one of these conservation approaches. And I actually realized this when I got a paper from a student that was in my class last year, Amanda Crandall, who said, we claim to be managing species and habitats, but what we're really managing is people. It's the people that control these habitats. We're telling the people, or what we need to do is tell the people, this is how you actually manage them. And if the people agree, we can reclaim the habitats. We can restore the species. So managing the people is what it's all about, and that is a central goal of Homegrown National Park. That's why I say we're talking about changing our culture. Right now, the culture is an adversarial relationship with nature. We need to change it to a collaborative one. And we need to do it. It's not optional. We cannot live without the natural world. Can we do it is the big question. I say we can. You don't have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live, and you can join Homegrown National Park when you do. If you join Homegrown National Park, it empowers you. Right now, the world has some big problems, and most people feel powerless. What can a single person do? Well, a single person can shrink their lawn, turn out their lights, put in a pollinator garden, use keystone plants, put in a prairie strip if you're a farmer, do all the things we just talked about. And then you are empowered to make big differences on the land that you own. It also allows you to join a national movement. You can be part of a tribe that's doing positive things. And finally, it shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire world's problems. You will get depressed if you do that. Just think about the piece of the world that you can influence. If you own property, it's obvious. You do these things we talked about, join Homegrown National Park, get yourself on the map. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a park, help a preserve. They're all underfunded, all understaffed. As a volunteer, they will love you. Ada Leopold once said that there are some who can live without wild things and some who cannot. And I know what he was talking about. He was talking about the emotional connection to wild things. And a lot of people don't have an emotional connection. But in reality, nobody can live for long without wild things. For it's wild things that keep us alive on this planet. Thanks very much.